So now we'll start the scientific sessions. And we have the two stalwarts of oncology to chair the sessions. We have none other than Padam Shri Dr. J.K. Singh sir to chair, and with him the co-chair is the person who needs no introduction, Dr. Harit Chaturvedi sir, who will be joining in. So the stage is over to Dr. J.K. Singh sir. Sir.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. It's my great pleasure to be a part of this prestigious webinar organized by Indian Society of Oncology. And this session will mainly focus on the GI cancers, which has become very much prevalent in this country. Friends, you will agree with me that the last few decades, we have seen tremendous advancement in the management of the GI cancers. And in spite of the geographical variations for the different type of GI cancers, still the entire country has giving focus to have a better management of these cancers. And scientific achievement which we have made till date, I think the maximum credit should go to the researchers, and at the same time different clinical trials also. And now it is possible to give a long life and a very good, better life to all the patients suffering from cancers. Recent guideline, you will find with that they have included radiotherapy also in the management of this GI cancers. And with preventive measures, now they are slowly moving towards an era where they will have free area of GI malignancy in the country. Friends, you will agree with me that in spite of the tremendous advancement, still we have some issues, still we have some gray areas for management of the GI cancer, for better management. So our learned speakers in this session, they will try to highlight those this thing. They will try to highlight the different issues. They will address those issues which have not been discussed so far. We have a galaxy of speakers. They are the most renowned persons in the country. The first I would like to call upon Dr. Sanjay Sharma. He is from Mumbai, and he is the director and professor surgical oncology, Asian Cancer Institute, and Lilavati Hospital, Mumbai. So with this few introduction, I would like to call upon Sanjay Sharma to start his presentation, please.
Thank you, Dr. J.K. Singh, for those kind words. And before that, a word of wisdom from the President-elect. I'm really grateful to the management of Indian Society of Oncology, the office bearers, especially Dr. Sanjeev Mishra, Dr. Harichal Sawant, and Sumant Gupta from local host for having this wonderful meeting. And I'm glad to know that the participants are very eager, and I'm sure youngsters would, will learn more and more for them. Without much ado, the topic which I have been given to speak is on gastroesophageal tumors. Now, it's too big and too vague a topic, and I was not sure what I need to be speaking upon. So I decided to speak upon the problems of D-junction approach to treatment. This includes partly the other specialty which I'm not going to be highlighting in this, but mostly it will be a surgical bias, as you would understand. Now, what is OG junctions for youngsters? It is nothing else but a tubular esophagus joining the bulky pouch of stomach, and a pale mucosa of esophagus joins the red mucosa of the stomach. And in between, there is a white line, which you can see here. That's oris aorta, and that is a dividing line, where you decide whether you are on that side of the fence or this side of the fence. Now, to treat, because it's a complex organ, with some parts of the tumor is up in the chest and rest all is in the abdomen. There are three types were described about 3 decades back by Professor Siebert from Germany. And you know that it's very simple. If you have lesion mostly in the esophagus and hardly anything in the lower end, that is in the stomach area, is Siebert 1, and it's very easy to identify. The problem arises in the other two. For example, if it is 1 centimeter above and 2 centimeter below, that's actually the cardia, and that is type 2. So you don't know whether it is stomach cancer or esophagus cancer. And the third is, again, very easy to diagnose, is that you have lesion here, let's say below 5 centimeter and here. This is a very complex sort of kind of classification, and was not palatable to majority people by radiology, by all kinds of investigation. So what TNM took over the reins and brought in Japanese classification called as a Nishi's classification. It is simpler. The thing is, once you see the white line, and then you see 2 centimeter above and 2 centimeter below, that's it. So anything which is above 2 centimeter is type 1. Anything is below 2 centimeter is type 2 or 3, because there's not much difference, and I will go along how to manage them. So why there is a challenge unique in G junction? As I said, it is 2 different organs. Pliability of gastric mucosa allows patient to come late. Symptoms are there, people ignore it. The lymph nodes are bidirectional, more in chest when the lesion is higher up, and lower down when they are in the abdomen. Most cases now they present are either squamous cancer from the upper part and adenocarcinoma from the lower end. Now, adenocarcinoma has got one biomarker, which is HER2 receptors, which we call them. They are positive, and we are other kind of things when we need to have, for example, patients have other kinds of variations, then you can add that in that case with molecular changes coming up, making it more easier for them as to separate those patients. Most patients are very advanced, very difficult to do an arterial clearance. Biologically, they are very aggressive and poor prognosis. And more importantly, because of this anatomical as well as pathological variations, there is always a debate what to do. This is the classification, 7th classification. See, it goes as per the depth. Earlier is mucosa, where this patient can be treated locally by endoscopic surgeries. Lower down, as he infiltrates into the muscularis mucosa, muscularis propria, and then beyond, the T1, T2, T3, T4 increases. And nodes, very simple, up to 2 nodes is N1, 3 to 6 is N2, and then you have more than 3 is 7. Now, but that is not enough, because this that cross trial was on 6th edition. There was a lot of debate whether it's really doing right. Probably not, because you see here in squamous cancer, now the division is that up to 2A or 2B, you have T2N0. But they are sometimes in upper third is different, middle third is different. The treatment here varies, and the cross trial did not match this. So hence this has been a little bit tweaked around here. However, it is simpler in adenocarcinomas that up to 2B with T2 or T3N0, M0, you can straight away take them for surgery unless and until there are reasons involved otherwise. So here comes the role of multidisciplinary approach, a role of neoadjuvant chemotherapy, chemoradiotherapy, which I'm going to discuss. And also I'll go along, what is the ideal surgical approach? What is the lymph node that we need to remove? And what are the extent of organ dissections? NCCN guidelines for squamous cancer, again, it is different. If you have a lesion, which is again 1B or 1C, straight surgery. If it's squamous cancer, more than 3 centimeter with poorly differentiated lesion, they need preoperative chemoradiation therapy or a chemotherapy. Less than 3 centimeter, again surgery. So this is not easy to determine by endoscopy. It's always a gray area and will remain so. And of course, when you have a lesion beyond, you will have a palliative concurrent CTRT. But for adenocarcinoma, again, You can see here, more than 3 centimeter, if it is there, you treat them with chemoradiotherapy, more than 3 centimeter, and less than 3 centimeter, again, you can do surgery straight away. So that's where the differences are there. For treatment of all these patients who are not safe for surgery, at least in GE junction, there are two major trials which have made impact. One is recently FLOT trial, where they've used docetaxel and oxaliplatin, bucovorin, etc. Where otherwise, in this case, they were compared to the ECF, which was David Cunningham's old regimen, where used to give neoadjuvant chemotherapy. This chemotherapy from Barton et al. Has produced result dramatically, where they are almost about up to 40-47% response rate, and patients do well, and overall survival also increased. But these patients were mostly gastric, GE junction, and almost all the patients were advanced. Compared to the FLOT trial, the FLOT is more of squamous cancer, though the numbers was less, but there are more patients from esophageal area, 73%, GE junctions were less, and they were less advanced patients. So to compare them that, okay, lower third, this you can choose, that one, at the moment there is no data available, but there are a lot of trials going on. It will show you whether which is better, which is not. And you can see here in this chart that more and more patients were advanced in a FLOT, and then in the trial by Cross. Hence, FLOT at the moment for GE junction seems to be the appropriate answer, for simple reason that you can avoid radiation therapy, and radiation to the part of stomach. Surgeons are a little wary of chances of increasing leak if you do the anastomosis at that area. Now for surgery, we need to know what the organs are. This is local nodes, your local area. Then these are regional nodes. There are numbers here. You can see they are in single digits. Then you have now different kinds of node in the mediastinum up to subcarinal. They are from 110 to, these are Japanese number now, accommodated by the HCCS classification. And this is extended thoracic dissection. Why we do so? See there. If you have a Sievert type 3, you can see all the lymph nodes around 1, 2, 3, 4 area. You can see the black line. But if you have lesion which is white here and type 2, there are lesions on both the sides. However, if you have lesion on type 1, you can see there are hardly any abdominal nodes. They are on the chest nodes. Similarly, was seen by Sievert et al. From Germany. In about 1,600 cases, the Sievert type, most nodes were in medias and the abdomen, hardly any in the chest. And the contrary to that, higher number of nodes, up to 55% in the abdomen, and almost 47% in the chest. And a little bit different, both sides were in type 2. There are certain numbers of node here. You can see here that 7, 9, 16, they are abdominal nodes. If you dissect in a type 1, 2, this becomes extended abdominal dissection. And type 2 and 1 nodes, they are in the chest. You need to remove them. Otherwise, the dissection is incomplete. The surgical strategies for complete primary tumors and lymphatic drainage, I can explain better by by next 2 slides. You can see here the type 1, the majority of tumors, the nodes are here, but they're almost about 15% of the area the upper node needs to be removed, which is reduced to almost about less than that in type 2, which is mostly abdomen. And here also in type 3, again, all the node dissection has to be, hence your approach to enter this area has to be emphasized. There were 2 trials, there were, Sievert has done trials about whether it is a type 1, type 2, type 3. You can see in this upper medial lower dissection were done. Here only the lower dissection were done in abdomen, and number of nodes that is removed are here, and they were all having right side approach. So lesion which is more than 3 centimeter on Sievert's type, and type 1 they do from right side, while the other lesions which are less than 3 centimeter, and all these abdominal lymph nodes are removed. In this, the stomach was not removed totally, but in the other, the whole stomach was removed. And see the survival here. Type 1, the survival here is up almost to 48, 40%. However, in type 3, the presentation is late and the survival is poor. where you can do in this type 1 and type 2. If you do a transthoracic approach, you have better survival than one this. And obviously, when you have a node dissection not done, you can see the dismal probability. And abdominal thoracic incision, or for that abdominal incision, the survival is poor in both the groups because of the nodal burden. So in type 1, the approach, type 1 and 3, the approaches are very, very defined. That is right side thoracotomy for right side, the entire mediastinal lymph node dissection. For type 3, entire abdominal dissection and lower hiatal clearance. However, the controversy is still type 2, whether we should do a transhiatal dissection or a left side thoracoabdominal or right thoracotomy. These were the 4 trials, and 2 of the best trials, that is Dutch trial and JCOG 9502 trial. You can see here, in type 1 and type 2, if they do dissections of the mediastinum, the survival increases in CEVERT type 1. However, the survival drops as if in the these nodes were not removed in type 2. Similarly, JCOG trial, they showed that if you do a mediastinal dissection in type 2, the survival improves, but drops further if you don't do that. And here they use left side thoracoabdominal or transhiatal. However, right side surgery versus transhiatal, you can see the difference in survival, 51% up to 37%. So lesser surgery is a cause of problem. Hence, you should remove the disease completely and make it R0. Again, here Stewart said that right side approach, the advantage is upper mediastinal lymph node can be removed. The disadvantage is obviously stressful surgery, intraoperative changes of body positions are required on the table, and obviously increased mortality. Now, obviously, it's come down, and you can remove all these lymph nodes which are up in the mediastinum higher up. When left thoracoabdominal, you can't remove these lymph nodes. The advantage is you can remove the clearance from lower end very well. The procedure is safe and simple in one go. Here again, you transhiatal, you do very poor dissection requirement. You can't do upper mediastinum, though it is difficult to do that all transhiatally. Last trial was a very major trial done by Sano et al. From Japan, where all this debate whether you should do a transhiatal or a left side surgery. Here it will be surprising, though we get a good clearance in left side surgery, the mortality and the survival is poor. So now Japan, they don't do it. Now there is a trial going on. Now the cause that was mentioned here, because these group of patients had quite a lot of mortality in their hand because of the difficulty. Now, clear cut, type 1, transhiatal hysterectomy is out, transthoracic, there is a Holz's randomized trial, type 2, transhiatal vasectomy versus for total gastrectomy for a type 2. Again, Holz's data is available. Extended gastrectomy, there is Jacob trial. So there are evidences available, level 1 evidences. For type 3, there is Jacob trial again that you need to do total gastrectomy and not dissection from below. And this was Christopher Murray's data from Paris. They have also said that you can do upper superior polar hysterectomy with extended two field dissection to do this procedure. If you have poor DC, then THE, but now with the advent of minimally invasive surgery, this is practically becoming obsolete. And type 2, again, right side procedures, and type 3, all from abdominal procedures. So, margins are required. Yes, you need to have 3.8 centimeter proximal margin, 5 centimeter distal margin, and you need to remove spleen only if the relevant number of 16 nodes are positive. You need not bother, they are perisplenic lymph nodes. So there is a high chance of mortality. This is practically now given away unless the nodes are positive. You can see if the good margin, survival is better. If you don't have margin, recurrence is there and your survival is poor. So type 1, reconstruction, we take stomach, out colon upstairs, anastomy mostly in the neck, hand supino stapler, and the root is mostly posterior mediastinal. Nowadays, with Japan, people are finding that regurgitation is too much in posterior. They are switching it over to retrosternal, where probably the data will show in a few years' time whether they are better or not. Now, type 2 deconstruction, you can do part of the stomach, and then part of, if you remove that whole stomach, then you can take a jejunum, you can interpose in between. Otherwise, what happens, the regurgitation is too much, and we put jejunum in between, that is called as Merendino's procedure, the regurgitation reduces considerably. So if you do a total gastrectomy, take jejunum up there, and for stomach, this is all stomach, you do extended proximal gastrectomy through hiatus, and do an either jejunoesophageotomy or a coloesophageostomy. This is the data we're tearing up. Now they made it simpler. There's a large study going in Japan, and last 2 slides, Mr. Chairman, that epicenter of the tumor is over 2 centimeter above to below G junction, clinical stage T2, more than T2, curable and arterial resection is feasible. Go straight, squamous cancer, operate right side, which I do. All squamous cancer, I operate from right side. If a esophageal invasion in adenocarcinoma more than 3 centimeter, I again go to the right side, which is practically now Japan has done that. They're doing this trial again. And clinically node positive patients in upper mediastinum, you need to remove the mediastinum. Of course, all these patients node positive will have neoadjuvant chemotherapy or chemoradiotherapy. Where adenocarcinoma straight away, they can be operated through a transhiatal approach. They have given up left thoracoabdominal approach, and they're told the reason for that, that the mortality is high, and that's why the survival decreases. However, our mortality with left thoracoabdominal approach, which India is very popular and popularized by Dr. Desai earlier, and now we did quite a lot of them, more than 600-700 cases that we have done. We have trying to analyze all that, but our mortality is almost less than 1%. So take home message for youngsters in the audience: any patient who has more than T2B, you must give some kind of therapy. The choice is institution if they want to do cross trial, if they're higher up reaches of the patients, or you can do neoadjuvant chemotherapy perioperative or a preoperative, which we do perioperative. We do FLOT. And in my opinion, the FLOT is one of the best regimen, though it is toxic, but our people are managing here very well. And then we operate. So 1B, well, I'm not discussed laparoscopy, thoracoscopy. There is now a lot of thoracoscopy, minimally invasive, but at the moment, there is no data about over 1B for improved survival in long term in this group of patients. Our 2A, 2BB all do proximal gastrectomy, radical esophagectomy, adjuvant therapy or neoadjuvant therapy for all these patients in nodal disease, and all T2, T3 patients. You may get even perioperative chemotherapy plus radiation therapy in good, like McDonald trial mentioned to you. With this, I thank all of you to have this patient hearing, and hope if you have any question, I'll be able to answer that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for giving the excellent deliberations in GE junction tumors. I think surgical oncology is an area where maximum refinement is going on. What is today, tomorrow the technique is different, and that giving the best result. So you have elaborated almost all the topics, all the globally, what is happening there, and how to make this area tumors, which is really very much painful and very much giving symptoms when the patient is having GE junction tumors. So you have elaborately taken all the things in your talk, and I'm sure the public will be benefited by this excellent television. So we move on to the next lecture, that is transform. So he has got tremendous experience of the medical oncology and very management of GI cancers with immuno-oncology. He will be speaking on that issue, and that's a very interesting to know what is happening there. So with this, I will request Dr. G.S. Bhattacharya to start his presentation, please.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for your kind words. I need to say thank you to the organizers for asking me to come here. We are going through disruptive times. In fact, we are coming to a situation of COVID fatigue. And I also have a feeling that shortly we will be having death by webinars and death by PowerPoint. So all said and done, I'm going to be starting to talk about the GI cancer with immuno-oncology. And immuno-oncology today is a disruptive methodology in oncology. And it's the fourth pillar, actually, or the fifth pillar of therapy. The first two being chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. Then we had the interventional radiology, and now we have immunotherapy. So I'm going to start off quickly, and I'm going to rush through. Let me try and tell you, this is the wheel of all immune tumors. All these immune tumors depend upon something that is good prognosis, or poor prognosis, or intermediate prognosis. And this is actually based on certain immune conjectures which actually occurs in the tumor. This is important because you have to remember a good prognostic immune tumor behaves well with immunotherapy. A poor prognosis usually doesn't respond, and you always have problems. And the intermediate prognosis is important. Why I'm showing you this slide is, in good prognosis, immunotherapy alone works. In poor prognosis, you have to make the tumor immune hot to make it work. And of course, in the intermediate part, you try and see what's the best method of management. So to start off, let me point it out and say, although I'll be talking about checkpoint inhibitors, but immunotherapy is not one thing. It is just not checkpoint inhibitors. And depending, as I told you, on the immunogenicity tumor, we keep talking about a lot of things like how and why we can actually do certain things. And way we can handle that would depend on various things. If you look at the cartoon carefully, you will see there is an IL treatment. This was one of the earliest treatments that we had in immunotherapy. This is now being integrated into the solid tumors to see an improvement. Busy slide, bad slide, but published in Cancer Research Institute. That tells you the amount of work that is up now when we are treating for immunotherapy. And that is something which you have to keep in mind. And please keep watch that if you look at hematology, then we have CRC, which is GI, pancreas, liver, gastric. And that makes a huge thing to tell you where we are moving forward. So before I start off, let me tell you, this came day for yesterday, the game changer for patients with esophageal cancer. My good friend and colleague just talked to you about it, and this is something that will tell you that adjuvant nivolumab in resected esophageal or gastroesophageal junction tumor showed an advantage of 22 months versus 11 months with single drug nivolumab. Game changer. And I will not be surprised by the end of April, it'll be in the NCCN guidelines telling you this is new and this may be important. And this is the graph that will show you that nivolumab has a survival benefit of 40% versus the standard care, which is supposed to be 35%. Huge benefit, a 40% reduction in death. The beauty is the plateauing up, and the plateau seems to be remaining. We'll see the data where it comes. But before I leave the subject, I want you to look at the slide carefully, marked out and read to you all. And I think so we had Dr. Sharma telling us the problem with esophageal and gastroesophageal junction is the squamous versus adeno. The entire data is driven by squamous cell carcinoma and not by adenocarcinoma. So one caveat we need to follow back home. And second is the PD-L1 expression doesn't seem to have any proper impact on this particular situation. Further important part of it is this is in the annex, not in the main text. I want you all to see something and say, in the Caucasian, it works very well, but in the Asians and Blacks and others, it doesn't seem to be having that impact. Numbers are small, but that's how we are all looking at it. So the take home for me from my end for this particular study would be, majority were esophageal patients, majority were adenocarcinomas driven by a small group of squamous cell carcinoma. Importantly, the personal approach, when we look at the CPS scoring, told us if you're above 5, you have a great response. What happens in 1 to 5, we don't know. But the trial did not look at CPS scores. What they looked at was PD-L1. Should everyone in this adjuvant situation be receiving this for 1 year? Costs are important. More analysis of data, but go home and realize that the whole thing is there is an advancement in UGI cancers, and this analysis, although with certain questions, is something that we all will take home. So now, what's wrong? Okay, I'll talk about the other tumor because I happen to be on that guideline. This seems to be not there. Can you see me, please? Hello. Okay, this is something that I wanted to tell you all, that this is the hepatoma framework. Dr. Malhotra and I were part of the ESMO guidelines for this hepatoma. And based on that, I have some prejudices of hepatoma. So I'll stick to that more. So from December 2007, when sorafenib was bought in, until date, we have seen hepatoma has moved in a big way out of it. I want you to look at this cartoon, and please remember, those marked out in yellow deep are the approvals, what happened. So sorafenib 2007, and now look at carefully from the time that we started off in 2017. First nivolumab, then pembro, and then we had combinations, and then we had the final combination with the VEGF. But please mark out, there are those dotted situations where the trials failed, whether it was pembro, whether it was nivo, whether it was whatever the drug was, there have been failures. So we have ideas. So just to put it across to you in short way, so you can remember and take it back. In first line setting, the standard of care has moved into what is called atezolizumab with bevacizumab, or in even metastatic or in inoperable patients. Doses I'm not going to go into. The nivolumab, which is actually approved for the second line, is now also approved for first line. If we cannot use nivolumab, give targeted therapy upfront. In second line, Pembro has been established, and establishes the combination of the two IOs, nivolumab and ipilimumab, which makes the difference. Now, to tell you all something, the atezolizumab trial has something which please remember when you're trying it. Get a upper GI endoscopy done. If there is a varus, treat the varus, because there may be a part of breathing. And do remember something, look at the literature carefully. Get your immune-related side effects clear in your mind and hand it out. And please remember that there is an issue. This atezolizumab had the question of the Pew score. It was basically B, which was required for treatment. Why does this work? This works, and I'm not going to go into details. We don't have the time, but to tell you, Bev actually works. Bevacizumab works synergistically with atezolizumab. It enhances the capacity of atezolizumab, and at the same time, it increases the blood flow that improves everything. And that's the PFS. A 60% improvement over sorafenib in first-line therapy, and a plateau off at the end of 34 months, which is actually around about 20%. This is something that we were not seeing. Another major game changer transforming our care. And that's the overall survival that will tell you has not yet been reached for I Am Brave. So basically, the combination was brave. This is to tell you that the duration of responses were excellent for those who responded, and they did pretty well. This was a cut of dates that are there. Actually was slightly more older. We will be seeing upright thing. Safety margins, no new signals, absolutely fine. Two new abstracts last year at the ASCO. One was that you could do the ctDNA to monitor these patients, what they will do. And the second one was that if you did a network analysis, we would have a combination of lenvatinib or a combination with nivolumab combined with bevacizumab, which may make a difference. And that was important, telling us that atezolizumab combined with bevacizumab may be better than any of these combinations on today's date. Okay, I'm going to say this, that this is the standard of care now with the approved thing come. We have two drugs, sorafenib, lenvatinib, and we have the third one if you can afford to do it. Lenvatinib pembrolizumab was presented at ASCO this year. This led into its first FDA designated breakthrough in the year 2019, now moving into an early trial. And I think in the next week's time, we will hear of its approval. This is something that I wanted to tell you. The combination of tremelimumab and durvalumab. This is important because this was telling you a combination of two IO and IOs. What came out of this was a beautiful statement that, if you look at the thing carefully, that the median duration of response has gone beyond a period of 32 months. And that is something very interesting at the higher dose of Pembro. So my take, recently approved IO combination of atezolizumab and bevacizumab is superior. Lenvatinib and Pembro and Druva with Tremlo is basically up for our takes. Advanced biliary tract. This is something that's close to all our hearts because this is the gallbladder where we find. It's always been advanced cancers, poor outcomes, but there is a subset of tissue agnostic of MSI or DMMR tumors where Pembro works, and it's approved basically. Let me tell you, this is a new paper again, assessing the efficacy of biomarkers of Dubra and with chemotherapy in advanced biliary tract. Excellent results, median survival 15 months. If you're using the biomarker, basically it's 18 months. If you're using the 4-drug combination, that's chemotherapy plus an IO, it turns out to be 20.7 months. That's kind of unprecedented if you have been treating biliary cancers. We have another couple of papers where this has come through. So putting it across now in a nutshell for the rest of the GI tract, I'll touch upon certain points. This is just the mechanism of action of CTL4 because this is one of the major drugs that we have. The other is the mechanism of action of PDL1, which tells you and what we have in our hand as well as the escapes. We'll just tell you that what it looks like, that the two drugs approved basically in GI tract, basically is nivolumab. It's in all MSIs and all DMMR metastatic colorectal cancers who have been treated upfront with chemotherapy It's indicated. And Nivo with ipilimumab actually is indicated, again, for anyone who's got this genetic disturbance there. Pembro is approved basically, again, in a similar situation. And if we look at the metastatic esophageal carcinoma, it's also approved provided the CPS scores are greater than 10. Similarly, for stomach, we have this, and we have emerging options. We are not going to get into the details as we have other issues. But just to tell you, gastric, first line, Pembro. Second line, Nibo. Nibo, if you first line, if other drugs cannot be used. Esophagus, we can use Pembro. We can use Nibo in unresectable, recurrent, or metastatic. Colorectal, upfront Pembro, or we can think of using a combination at a later date. You can go for a tissue agnostic test, irrespective of the origin of the tumor when we do that. So just to tell you all, these are the major trials which are running, which makes a big difference. I think I'm not going to get into it, but just to add on and say, the classification of esophageal cancers are dramatically changing. And as you can see that the MSI group and the CIN groups have come up. Similarly, the stomach thing has changed, and I'm not going to get into it as we're doing it, but to come here and stop and tell you that in first line practice changing evidences from immune checkpoint inhibitors with chemotherapy from Checkmate 649 and Keynote are listed now in the NCCN guidelines for 2201. The nivolumab for your esophageal carcinoma and Pembro with a CPS score greater than 10 or MSI tumors is indicated in second line. We similarly have Pembro for gastric and GJ tumors in third line with PDL1 scores greater than 1, and Nivo is approved in Japan for this purpose, but not by the US government for this. This is just to put it across the gastric thing, just to tell you that if you have to do a gastric cancer treatment today, get a HER2 done, please. If the HER2 is negative, then immunotherapy has a role in almost all lines. Just to tell you, the combination of therapy does make a difference. And if the CPS score is more than 10, then Pembro is a big game changer. Similarly, in third line, we would see this nivolumab can become a major game changer in this area. I am going to skip this slide and then come down and just tell you all that there is something that we got to realize, that these drugs have come to play a role in GI cancers. Colon cancers, sided, we all knew right and left, but now it's time to change our method and say CIN plus and MSIH plus. MSIH plus is basically a less common tumor. CIN is basically a more common tumor, but what we see is that immunotherapy works best in the MSHI, that 15% of tumor where it works low. And that's to tell you across the tumor agnostic that the MSI study from Mantis tells you that 3.8% of all cancers are showing you MSI, where endometrial, colon, and gastric carcinoma dominate the whole thing, but it's present in all the rest of it. The Mantis study, of course, tells you that there is heterogeneity within the tumor itself. And please remember, it's a pickup for Lynch syndrome. But do remember something, that the Memorial Sloan Kettering data showed that there was a lower incidence of MSI. The methodology for testing was separate. So this is an important question, that MSI and MMH deficiency are actually complementary to one another and do not supplement. You might have to do both, and both carry a different meaning. And specifically, when you're looking for Lynch, you have to look for both. So NCCN guideline 2021 says that you must test every patient of colon cancer with MMR or MSI or both if you can afford it. And not doing that would not be fair. And that's how Pembro behaves in this group who have the MSI or DMMR deficiencies. Again, I'm not going to go into details of the trial, but tell you all that if you are working it on the first line, it shows a much better control rates than when you're doing it in the second line after the chemotherapy. Similarly, if you are using a combination of Nivo and ipilimumab, in this condition with the maintenance of Nivo, we would see that data, again, is a game changer, approved in this group, specifically if there's a BRAF mutant tumor. If you have a BRAF mutant MSI high tumor, this is a beautiful place to use it, because this was always a bad thing. So this is something we all know, and that's the data telling us the way the differences are. So please remember, this is very important. Quality of life is excellent in this combination. It doesn't change. There is no unusual signals. This is a standard guideline now of staying in the first line or second line. If the patient is for intensive therapy, then Pembro or a combination even Ipi is high. But if the patient is not for intensive therapy, it's possibly better to use a single drug. That's the second line. Third line, I will stop here and take questions, but tell you all, time for GI cancer has changed. COVID times was one of the best time in which we saw the number of cases and number of drugs that were approved in GI cancers was very high. So COVID time has been a great time for immuno-oncology as a GI cancer is concerned. Thank you.
It's a fantastic lecture. And I think the immuno-oncology, it has changed the entire scenario. GI cancers, which was very much difficult cancer to manage, with these combination of the drugs, they have already given a long life and a quality of the life also. So with this, and Dr. GS has also explained beautifully which drug to be given first and which drug to be given later on in a sequential order in all different types of GI cancer. Thank you, GS, once again. And now we move on to another topic that is in the form of debate, gastric cancer. Gastric cancer. So should radiotherapy be included as a part of adjuvant therapy? Initially, radiotherapy has no role or very limited role in case of gastric cancer, but now it has already included as a part of the treatment in the latest guideline. The debater will, Dr. Manish Siddha from Indore. He is consultant radiation oncologist, SRJ, CVCC Cancer Hospital. And later on, against Dr. Viraj Livinjia from Ahmedabad, and introduction of consultant medical oncologist, HCG Cancer Center. So with this, I invite Dr. Manish Siddha from Indore.
Good morning, everybody. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, sir.
So my topic of deliberation today is
put it your slides on the slideshow mode, sir.
Included as a part of adjuvant treatment. So as we all know, that surgery is the mainstream treatment as far as gastric cancer is concerned. It requires pre-operative as well as post-operative treatment. Surgery is not the only treatment in gastric cancer. And in spite of the best of the centers, the death rate is almost 50%. I'll explain the present scenario about the status of the treatment modalities that are available for the gastric cancer. As far as background goes, there is a lot of data to suggest that how important is radiotherapy for the treatment of gastric cancer as part of adjuvant treatment. There is a SEER database which has shown that adjuvant radiotherapy has improved survival. And if we talk about radiotherapy in adjuvant setting, this study has to be discussed, which is INT 0116. It has shown significant benefit in terms of overall survival, 36 versus 27 months. Hazard ratio is 1.5 and the p-value is significant. The important thing to note in this study is that only 10% of the patient had achieved D2 resection, leading to emphasis of local treatment in form of radiotherapy. As we all know that there are Western and Eastern world issues. US has different standard of care, UK has different standard of care, and the eastern part of the world, which is Japan and other countries, have this different standard of care. In UK, they follow MAGIC trial where they give perioperative chemotherapy. In Japan, they give adjuvant chemotherapy in terms of S1, and in US population, especially after this study, which is INT 0116, chemoradiation as part of adjuvant treatment has become important part in important aspect of the treatment. Now, if you talk about adjuvant treatment, then there is a chemotherapy, there is a radiotherapy, and then there is chemoradiotherapy. First, we'll discuss about the chemotherapy. What all information we have as far as adjuvant chemotherapy in the adjuvant setting. There is a classic study which has used capecitabine plus oxaliplatin, and it has not shown much of improvement in survival, especially in T3, T4, and N0. Although in earlier stages of the gastric cancer, it has shown improvement in progression-free survivals, but in the bulkier disease, the survival is questionable. In European, as far as European studies are concerned, there is FFCT 88001. It's an RCT between surgery followed by adjuvant chemo versus surgery alone. The 5-year overall survival is 41.9% versus 34.9%. Then there is a EOTC group which has included 23 institutes, and then there is ICCG group which has used almost 16 institutes, and they have used all kinds of combination of chemotherapy drugs. Few have used Femtex, or some the other part of the study was Femtx, and in this it has shown that there is no difference in the overall survival. Then there are studies from Italy. Again, they are not showing improvement in survival or DFS. So when we summarize all this information, we find that adjuvant chemo has limitations in the D2, especially in the D2 resected patients, and intensive chemo, if we give in patients who have undergone D1 resection, they don't improve any results. So what is the status of the current surgical treatment? The perception is that we give adjuvant chemotherapy to improve survival, and widespread application of D2 resection improves overall survival in gastric cancer patients. But the reality is different. It shows that leading treatment centers, only 50% of the patients undergo D2 resection. And if we extrapolate this information into our Indian population, then we have a lot of variations, a lot of discrepancies as far as extent of resection is concerned. The survival is related to the number of lymph node that has been dissected. And even in D2 resection, these numbers are inadequate. So whether they are true D2 or not D2 is still things to ponder, and we have to look deep into it. And radiotherapy is the only local treatment that complements the surgery, and there is a data to suggest that inadequate dissection, especially those patients who have undergone D1 dissection only, surgery has given tremendous, adjuvant radiation has given the tremendous results. So what is the scientific basis of chemoradiation? There is INT's study which is there since 2001, and it is about positive about adjuvant CT and RT. There is a South Korean study of 1,000 patients which has shown improved survival. Another Korean study which has compared adjuvant chemo versus chemoradiation have improved in the DFS and LRFS. There is an ARTIST trial which is also one of the landmark trial, and it has shown that in 396 node positive patients, 3-year DFS was 77% versus 72.3% in node positive patients. And now we'll be having ARTIST-2, which will be comparing about different drugs and combinations of chemoradiation. This is the trial which I was discussing about. It's an Korean trial, 458 patients. It has used cisplatin and capecitabine versus 2 cycles of XP by postoperative CRT followed by 2 cycles of XP. The radiation therapy was delivered using the 2 anterior-posterior beams, and it is very important to understand that all those trials in which we are discussing, the radiation that was used was a kind of a basic kind of radiation, which has a lot of limitations. And now we all know that the world has moved along, especially in last 2 decades. The better techniques of radiation allows us to be more aggressive about treating not only gastric cancer patients but also other patients. So there was a post hoc analysis which was included in the 396 patients, and it has shown that there is a benefit of chemoradiation in this population, and 3-year disease-free survival was 72% versus 78% in the concurrent chemoradiation arm. The other important thing which needs to be pondered is that the concurrent treatment schedules, it reduces the numbers of cycles of chemotherapy, the doses of chemotherapy, and thus leading to the reduced side effects, which is an issue of major concern. And it allows us to complete the rate of adjuvant therapy to 80 to 90%. There are various trials in Europe, various trials in Asia, and which has shown that adjuvant chemotherapy has shown poor completion results. But ARTIST, when chemoradiation was used, it has achieved the mentioned criteria. What are the benefits of radiotherapy into 2021 especially? Now we have higher techniques which provides individualized adjustment based on tumor size and prescribed radiotherapy dose, permitting optimal dose distribution in the target area. We can give higher radiation doses in the target area, preventing irradiation to the important tissue. We should understand that all those previous trials were able to use 45 gray and 25 fractions only because of the side effects that are concerned with the radiotherapy. Now there are various trials which have extended dose to 50.8 up to 54 gray also in few trials. Although there is no data to suggest that higher dose has improved the result, but still with different kinds of combination and with judicious approach, we can improve our results from here. Those patients, those patients when they underwent subgroup analysis, there were certain subsets of patients. We should also understand that my topic is about adjuvant treatment in the gastric cancer. But we should understand that the gastric cancer of Western population is different from the gastric cancer of Eastern population. The gastric cancer of Western population is different, especially when we talk about patients from US and the patient from UK. And there are different variants of cancer which are now well understood, and according to the variants of the histology, we can make out that what kind of patients are going to respond to the radiotherapy mode. So the intestinal type of gastric cancer, they get significant benefit from the adjuvant radiotherapy, unlike the diffuse variants of gastric cancer, which are kind of resistant tumor to radiotherapy. ARTIST again has shown the positive rate of lymph node involvement was independent of the prognostic factor. When the nodal ratio is more than 25% in the analysis, they have shown significant difference in DFS. And then there is a Marioma index of unresected disease. That was it's a Marioma index is a Japanese index, but then it has been extrapolated on the Western population, and they have analyzed that when this index is more than 5, then these patients are more benefited by adding adjuvant radiotherapy to the patient. So to summarize, what are the candidates for adjuvant radiotherapy? Those patients who have failure to undergo D2 lymphadenectomy, inadequate lymph node dissection, intestinal variants of gastric cancer, bulky disease, positive nodes, higher nodal status, and the index of more than 5. And when we evaluate any gastric cancer patient, especially in our population, out of 6 to 8 features that are mentioned, 3 to 4 features are seen in kind of every patient. So I rest my discussion over here and would like my colleague Dr. Viraj to take it from here. Thank you so much.
So I thank you organizers, Dr. Suman, for having me here, and Dr. Manish, thank you for having me as your counterpart in this debate. So I have to talk about adjuvant radiotherapy in gastric cancer, and my position, of course, everybody knows it's no, definitely no. And let me make a few disclosures here. I saw in the panel, there was Dr. Sanjay Sharma and there were some eminent surgeons. So definitely we don't want to make them angry. Like Dr. Siddha was saying that D2 resection is not standard of care in India. I think so you will make them very angry. So we don't want to talk about anything which is R1 resection or less than D2 resection, because we know that are standards of care. And we've always known in past that radiotherapy is just about covering up for your surgeons. When surgeons do inadequate job, radiotherapists always cover up for them. We know that. However, in this academic meet, we don't want to divulge into that. We want to stick to standards of care, and standard of care for today across whole world is a D2 resection for gastric cancer. So if a patient has undergone D2 resection, I want to present a case to make my case that radiotherapy must not be given at any circumstances in gastric cancer. So this is classic patient, what we see, 52 male, early tumors on CT scan, endoscopic biopsy showed signet ring cell, and the surgeon thought this is an early tumor, and they went in for gastrectomy with a D2 lymph node dissection, and the histopathology showed T3, N2, 8 lymph nodes positive. Of course, the margins are free. The D2 resection was performed. So I want to discuss 2 points in this case. Should this patient get adjuvant radiotherapy as part of his treatment plan? And second point is, if this patient received preoperative chemotherapy like FLOT, does he then require RT as part of the adjuvant plan? So I'll take one point at a time. So should radiotherapy be given for his treatment plan? And my colleague, Dr. Siddha, discussed this trial, McDonald's trial, which is the only trial which radiation oncologists have to go back to. Mind you, this trial was done in 80s and 90s, where the surgical standards were not good. And in fact, there was nothing else to offer. As you can see in the control arm, it was observation. Nobody in the right mind in today's world would do gastric cancer surgery and leave the patient alone. So I think so this trial does not apply for current contemporaries. However, going through this trial, this was 5 of you alone with radiation for about 4 months time compared to nothing. And what they found was that chemoradiation is better than doing nothing. But rightly so, Dr. Siddha pointed out the fallacies of this trial, that if you see D2 resection in these patients was only 10%. That means 90% of patients who were on this trial during that time in 90s was an inadequate surgery, our surgeons can comment on that. In fact, Smalley and colleagues 10 years down the line did a subset analysis of McDonald's, that who were these patients who were gaining all the survival. And you can see that if patient underwent D2 resection, there was no benefit of adding chemoradiotherapy compared to doing nothing. So in this scenario, it was just as good as placebo. And like Dr. Siddha was saying, in diffuse histology, in fact, it was going towards worse. And in India, we have more signet ring cells carcinoma. Very nicely, you summarized ARTIST trial. It's a Korean study. It's a contemporary study. It's a new era study in the era of 2010 and 15, where they were asking that after D2 resection, if you add chemo or if you add chemo plus radiation, is there any benefit? And that's the overall, that's the survival curves in front of you. As you can see, they are on top of it. But Dr. Siddha wanted to focus on this subset analysis. Mind you, this subset analysis is a subset analysis. It's an afterthought. It was not a before thought. And it can be at best hypothesis generating. We have to congratulate these Korean investigators that they did not stop there. They went ahead and tested this hypothesis in another phase 3 trial called ARTIST-2 trial, which my colleague did not casually show the results of it, because with this results, the radiotherapy is dead. So this was 900 patients, D2 resection, all lymph node positive, were randomized to get chemotherapy or chemotherapy plus radiation. And what we found, that there were 2 take-home messages. That one, oxaliplatin is very important. So if you don't give oxaliplatin, you are on the blue curve. If you give oxaliplatin, you are on the orange curve. But let's look at the right side of the curve, the second curve. If you give radiation or if you don't give radiation, the curves are right on top of each other. So Dr. Siddha, I agree. You had a subset analysis which was encouraging, but in a phase 3 ARTIST-2, this was published last 2 years ago now in ASCO, and it showed that radiotherapy is not and must not be considered as part of adjuvant therapy, even in a node positive patients, as long as the surgeons has done a D2 resection. Moving to the second point, if this patient had got preoperative therapy like ECF or FLOT, then doing radiotherapy for node positive, does it make any sense? We have a study from Dutch, it's critique study published 3 years ago now in Lancet, large trial, again 800 patients, where they were randomized after surgery to get 3 cycles of chemo versus chemo radiation. And what they found, again, no benefit of giving radiotherapy. As you can see, the curves on the right, the red and the blue curve are right on top of each other. So even if the patient had got preoperative chemotherapy, there is no benefit of addition of radiotherapy in adjuvant part. And in the subset analysis, there was no subset which trended towards benefit. So points to, so if I have to conclude, should this patient get adjuvant radiotherapy as part of treatment plan? No. If this patient got pre-op chemo, then does he require radiotherapy? No. And you know, Dr. Siddha, I must tell you, no means no. Na ka matlab na hi hota hai. There is no way radiotherapy is coming in adjuvant part in radiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manish and Dr. Viraj. So we'll be not having any time for rebuttal. Sorry to inform, sir. So we're moving to the next session. With your permission. Fine, sir?
Oh, go ahead.
Fine, sir. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Bharat Chauhan to do the moderation. He's a consultant medical oncologist from Bombay Hospital and Nanavati Super Specialty Hospital. Over to you, Dr. Bharat.
Good morning, everyone. In this Sunday morning, and I feel it's a academic feast which just Viraj has given to us, and I think Manish also had a good debate with Viraj, and I congratulate organizers as well as my friend and brother Dr. Sumant Gupta for giving me this opportunity. So I've been told to discuss this targeted and immunotherapy in gastroesophageal cancer, which is a hot topic nowadays, and I've been told 2-3 days back. So unfortunately, I have not been able to make the slides, but we'll have a good fruitful discussion with the eminent panelists. I hope all the panelists are there. Dr. Sanjay Desai sir.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Rudra Acharya.
Yes.
And Dr. Kanuj Malik.
Yes, sir.
And Nirav, anybody else?
Yes, sir. All four are there. Dr. Sanjay Desai, Dr. Rudra, Dr. Kanuj, and Dr. Suman Kumar. All are there.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Suman, are you there? Dr. Suman? Suman, can you hear me? I think maybe there's some connectivity issue with the Suman. So let's begin the moderation, and I feel we should when we have I just we'll discuss case wise. I'll enumerate a case, and then we can take the discussion forward. There's a 40-year-old male gentleman presented with 3-month history of gradually progressing dysphagia with weight loss and constitutional symptoms, loss of appetite, and endoscopy showed a mass at the gastroesophageal junction, which is an ulcerative growth, and then the biopsy is advised, and CT scan was also done. Biopsy showed adenocarcinoma, and CT scan showed only CT scan thorax was done, which showed local mass with periesophageal lymph nodes. So let's begin. How do you like to work up this case? Desai sir, can you begin the discussion and give us some light?
Since you have given the work, endoscopic ultrasound would be also helpful in this patient. And the CT scan thorax, it is not incomplete for this. I would also like to include the upper CT scan upper abdomen in this patient to know the state of liver and celiac axis nodes. These two main important things are needed for this patient for evaluation. After in endoscopic ultrasound, I will know the thickness of the tumor, periesophageal nodes, whether there is any breach or whether there is any surrounding vital structure involvement present or not. And for the CT upper abdomen and thorax, it will rule out by metastatic workup of in liver or any other major lymph nodes in the splenic area also.
Sir, is there any role of PET scan in your practice, or in your opinion, you feel that PET scan is recommended in such patients? What's your views and thoughts?
GI tumors generally do not have a very good uptake of PET scan, PET related FDG updates. But since most of the patients, as advised by the many other colleagues, come with the PET scan report on the staging workup, at times we find some abnormal lymph node uptake in axilla or in level 4 neck nodes, or even sometimes mediastinal nodes. But considering the axillary or mediastinal, we must have to consider there might be tuberculosis also in India.
Basically, you feel that PET scan, can be done, but it is not mandatory.
It is not mandatory.
I agree with Dr. Desai in all points. But once you do a upper GI endoscopy and a primary CT scan, you will be able to know whether it is T2 disease or beyond T2. I will definitely advise a PET scan if it is beyond T2. That is my take.
Okay. So you feel that PET scan is worthwhile and it will eliminate many patients who may upstage and may not require.
Correct. Because you see, if you in a CT
therapy
scan or endoscopy you find a big tumor and it is T3, it will be criminal not doing a PET scan, because it will definitely show up upper mediastinal nodes. So it will totally upstage the disease. So at least we must know what we are dealing with, then the planning will be better.
Totally agree with Dr. Rudra's point. And Dr. Suman, you want to make any point regarding PET scan and staging workup in a case?
Yeah,
in this case?
At our institute in Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, we do not routinely advise a PET scan. So CT scan would be sufficient, CT scan of thorax, abdomen, and pelvis for staging workup. And because the PET scan would not be able to pick up my tiny peritoneal nodules, the PET scan is not advised routinely.
Okay, but looking at the tumor at the G junction or more so in lower end of esophagus, you feel that CT scan is good enough, or still you will tempted to do PET scan, or it's a logistic financial constraints you feel that you will not be able to advise PET scan?
More than the logistic and financial constraint, it doesn't add much to the staging workup. Other than, once CT scan thorax abdomen is done, then if it is a locally advanced disease, then staging laparoscopy and then proceed with the treatment.
Yeah. So, Kanuj, you want to make any point?
So, for as Dr. Sanjay said, for gastric tumors, there's a high false negative rate for PET scan. So even we routinely avoid it. But in our practice for esophageal cancers, we generally tend to offer PET scan to the patients for completion of staging.
Yeah. That is what I feel, Dr. Kanuj made a very valid point that gastric tumors or the lower tumors, they don't have much uptake. So PET CT is not a good modality. But for esophagus, there is enough data which suggests to us that, many patients can be upstaged and you can avoid surgeries and local treatment in such kind of patients. So second important point in a workup, in a case in which you are looking at targeted immunotherapy, how relevant you feel that these biopsy tissue specimen for you people, and what all markers you will advise upfront. Suppose that in this patient we did biopsy and it's adenocarcinoma. So how we will move forward in molecular testing in this patient? Desai, sir?
Sir, if it is squamous, then it will be, I would go only for EGFR or something like that. For adenocarcinoma, Herceptin related HER2. These two main basic primary markers I would add, otherwise not. Sometimes Ki-67 might be helpful because it shows the division capability or not.
Suman, do you agree? What's your protocol at Tata Memorial?
I'm a radiologist, so I would not comment on
that. Wrong. Okay. Yeah. Dr. Rudra, can you throw some light?
Actually, till now, immunotherapy in upper GI cancers is only, to be frank, used in metastatic setting only. So if the patient is having metastatic, definitely we do range of markers like as sir mentioned, Herceptin, then you can do PDL1 and MIS and MMR, and but these all are in metastatic setting. At present, for straight cut tumors which are T1, T2, or locally advanced, which will respond to chemotherapy, they straight away go for surgery. It is only when they reach a metastatic stage, then again the biopsies are re-evaluated and they are sent for these kind of markers to help them to have immunotherapy. But as Bhattacharya sir showed in the slides with the new Checkmate 577 and new kind of papers coming up, I think it will be worthwhile that in our primary surgical treatment also with the preoperative planning, maybe gradually in the next decade, we will be moving towards more markers to be done, just like in colon or rectum.
So, Doctor, let's say this is a metastatic case and they are, tiny lung mets and there are some liver mets also. And suppose this is stage 4, then what all panel you feel that it's correct at upfront, which we should order, and the biopsy is available and it is adenocarcinoma and tumor tissue is also adequate. So what all marker you feel that it should be advised upfront?
As I mentioned, same thing, HER2, then PD-1, PD-L1, and MSI and MMR. That comes to my mind. Yeah.
Okay. Any role of tumor mutation burden?
TMB is also coming up, but I think it depends on the panel and availability of the tests. TMB is definitely one option. Yeah.
Okay. And you will not recommend NGS upfront?
No.
NGS upfront may not be required, but when you come to second line or third line, doing a NGS might be worthwhile.
Dr. Kanuj, your opinion? Stage 4
as,
biopsy available, what all molecular marker you
sir,
feel
as,
is right to
sir, as Rudra
advise?
said, the first marker of choice will be HER2 definitely, because the first line of treatment, if it is HER2 positive, is standard treatment. But yes, if the tumor is HER2 negative, then we might go ahead and do the other markers, as Rudra sir has already mentioned, for this MMR. And we routinely don't do TMBs. And NGS, we generally reserve for second line, sir, not for the first line.
Okay. And let's also, I think you all have given their good insights. And I feel one more marker which is now coming up and there are few oral drugs available is anti-RK gene fusions. Yeah, there are 2 drugs which have been approved for use in gastroesophageal tumors and gastric tumors. So anti-RK, PD-L1, MSI, deficient MMR, HER2, and TMB plus minus as most of the panelists have discussed. So I think these are the markers one can think of doing. But first we should begin in a sequential manner with HER2. If HER2 is negative, then the role of other markers becomes very, very important. And regarding PD-L1 and MSI, what's the opinion of the house, which you feel is more important in deciding immunotherapy in this subset of patients? Desai sir?
Since this is adenocarcinoma, I would go for MSN1.
MSI?
MSI.
Okay. And sir, MSI and PD-L1 by ISC and MSI by PCR?
Fish. Yes.
Fish of PCR. Yeah. And Dr. Rudra, your opinion?
Almost same. If it is, I think, more, if it is exactly G junction, then I think the same opinion. But if you feel that it is a CVOT1 or esophageal type, then PD-L1 might be better.
So I think that's a valid point. So so this comes one important question which comes here is what's the role of liquid biopsies in this G junction and gastric tumors? Have you encountered any patient in which, the stage 4 biopsy is done upfront and the patient relapse and biopsy site is not inaccessible, and so what do you feel we can place liquid biopsy in this subset? Like we are doing it in lung cancer now, liquid biopsy is really coming up, and EGFR panel can be done easily on liquid biopsy. So do you feel in future or in coming times liquid biopsy will be good?
It may be good.
So in
It may be good for squamous cell carcinomas. That is CUAT1 type only, but not other parts, I think, because adenocarcinoma being in the intra-abdominal part or 2 or 3, it might be easily approachable by laparoscopy or anything else. Even intervention radiology can do a good biopsy, true cut biopsy from the recurrent masses.
And Dr. Rudra, your opinion on liquid biopsy?
Yeah, same. I think with stomach, anything in the stomach, it is very easily accessible by endoscopy or diagnostic laparoscopy. So I think the point of doing a liquid biopsy doesn't come. But definitely, if it is esophageal wall recurrence, because most of them, they recur at the anastomotic site, and there may not be mucosal disease to take the biopsy, but it is in the wall. In those cases, I think it might be a point to ponder.
Okay, thank you. So I think liquid biopsy is really be evolving concept, and I think in coming times it may play a role, and maybe in monitoring of disease, because we in many diseases we are seeing this circulating tumor cells, and then we see that monitoring of disease diagnosis, all kinds of samples can be done on liquid biopsy. Maybe more data will be required in future. So again, for all panelists, does histology plays a role in deciding type of molecular testing as well as treatment in this subset of patient? Desai, sir?
Yes. Histology will always be important because it is a wide range. One is squamous, one is adeno. The treatment will change in both of the histologies differently.
Sir, in squamous, what all molecular tests you will think of advising, and in adeno, what all? Just for the sake of our audience, for
in squamous, molecular state will be based on EGFR or PDL1, and in adeno it will be this MSI or Herceptin.
Dr. Rudra, your thoughts?
Almost same, I think. If it is a true G junction, then also Herceptin will play a more important role. Otherwise, in adeno, I think more of MSI or deficient MMR, and if it is esophageal, more of EGFR and PDL1.
Dr. Kanuj, final thoughts on this question?
Sir, I also agree. Basically, the concept as explained by Desai sir remains the same, that we'll do these. Apart from that, as you all mentioned, testing, the NGS testing for NTRK gene fusions can also be added upon to that now, because we have drugs for that. But my thoughts remain the same. I agree with Desai sir.
Okay, so let's come to quickly on each of the molecules. So if the patient is HER2 positive, G junction, adenocarcinoma, Desai sir, your treatment of choice?
Would be Herceptin first.
Herceptin with chemotherapy or alone? Sir?
Herceptin with chemotherapy.
Sir, what kind of a backbone, sir, you prefer? Backbone chemotherapy?
That will be Taxol plus carboplatin.
Paclicarbo.
Paclicarbo, Herceptin.
Dr. Rudra, your thoughts on?
Almost same. Some patients who use DOF actually.
Okay, so any thoughts on ECF, EOX, Capox plus Herceptin? No.
Yeah. I think that actually we are surgical oncologists. So I think majority of the decisions is taken on the PS score, the patient tolerance and all that, because most of these patients are malnutrited actually, and they come with PS which is low. So I think depending on the tolerability, the medical oncologist decides. And whatever you told, we with Pacli-Carbo, we are quite comfortable.
Okay.
And we have a good series of DOF also, I think.
Dr. Kanuj,
We
are
are
you comfortable? Are you comfortable with
sir.
the Pacli-Carbo, or you want to go with TOGA trial?
So we generally prefer capecitabine with oxaliplatin or cisplatin. Our medical oncologist here, along with trastuzumab.
So I feel I also practice the same, that capecitabine, oxaliplatin plus HER2 positivity. So let's come to quickly the next one. If the HER2 is negative, but PDL1 CPS score is more than 10, and this we are talking in first line. First line CPS score is more than 10, PDL1.
So if CPS score is more than 10, then it is obvious would go for pembrolizumab along with chemotherapy in the first line. Now there are trials for that. That will be our first choice if CPS score is more than 10.
Yeah, I agree. So I totally agree with Dr. Kanuj that there are many trials, 012, 0159, 180, Keynote 180, 181. So many have shown that CPS score more than 10 is an indicator in which you can safely administer pembrolizumab with chemotherapy with desired results. Dr. Rudra, you have any opinion?
I think same, but definitely the more trials are coming up. Keynote 585 and others are also coming up. That will show more, give more evidence.
Desai sir?
Sir, basically, I would like to discuss with my patient and the medical oncologist, giving the second line or third line of treatment. Considering the survival of the patient, what advantage this, whether it is cost benefit or not. I work on a principle to save one person. I will not bring the family on the road.
Totally agree.
Therefore, just will like to mention that recently PIPAC has come into role, and if you find that with first line, second line, the response is not good, and we are wasting our finances, energy, the bone marrow reserve is depleting, then you can give a drug holiday with a PIPAC, because if it is a but they are more for adenocarcinomas of the stomach, then you can give a drug holiday with only PIPAC, pressurized intraperitoneal aerolized chemotherapy, maybe 3 sessions, 6 weeks apart. And after that, in the meantime, you can do a NGS and find out what is suitable for the patient. And after these 3 sessions, around 18 weeks, you can again go in and start your immunotherapy schedule.
Agree, sir. So, so we are through with, and if the CPS score is less than 10, Dr. Kanuj?
So then, if it is, as you mentioned, adenocarcinoma, there is option of nivolumab if CPS score is less than 10 but more than 5. Then that option remains there.
So you will put nivolumab in place of pembrolizumab if the CPS score is more
less than 5 and less than 10.
More than 5, less than 10. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Desai sir, your thoughts on nivolumab? Because
Sir,
we have discussed pembrolizumab, but nivolumab is left out. Your thoughts?
Sir, I just read that paper with Dr. Bhattacharya source 2-3 days back only, which showed some survival benefit of 11 months. Otherwise, I have no other experience on that drug. Basically, the medical oncologist is the cases in such type of things.
Yeah, totally agree, sir. So these are expensive drugs, as mentioned by Desai sir and Dr. Rudra, that one has to be, cost effective when you are looking at these kind of tumors which have survival benefit of few months, just PFS benefit of 2 to 3 months. The cost is huge, and every three weeks you have to spend 2 to 3 lakhs. So which seems to be cost burden, and in the end, if the survival is not great, then you can also offer different therapies. We have chemotherapy like weekly paclitaxel and others. There's a data for docetaxel, irinotecan. So one can resort to that cheaper therapies. But yeah, those who are affordable and the PDL1 is good, it seems that these drugs are doing wonders for these patients and getting good survival benefit. So last drug which we will discuss is ramucirumab. So Dr. Kanuj, where do you place ramucirumab now with so many drugs in your armory? Earlier, this was the only targeted drug which has shown some benefit, but now we have Nivo, we have Pembro. So where do you place ramucirumab in your practice?
So now it is generally reserved for adenocarcinoma as a second line drug, not as a first line. But I will also leave that decision to the medical oncologist. I will not be the right person to take that call. Second line and third line generally is, but we generally don't reserve it for the first line.
Okay, Dr. Rudra, your call.
Mostly used in stomach cancers, I believe.
Yeah, gastric cancers.
Gastric
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah, basically there is a data for regard and rainfall and rainbow trial. We showed that it can be given in second line as single agent, and it can be combined with paclitaxel. So both have shown significant benefit, but benefit to the tune of few months, not that it is years. Again, cost benefit ratio is a concern in this kind of setting and this kind of scenario. So I feel
what I feel is as compared to Western, they diagnose
Hello, Dr.
upper
Bharat.
GI cancers in very early stages, and we get cases in very late stages, as is locally advanced or metastatic. So whatever disease-free period DFS we get is hardly 12 months to 18 months. So whatever said and done, with these type of molecules coming up, there is a hope that we can extend it to maybe 18 months to 24 months because it is really a doomsday for the patient when he's diagnosed with a stomach cancer in metastatic or locally advanced.
Hello, Dr. Bharat.
Yeah. Tell me.
2 minutes to go.
Okay. We are concluding. So as Neerav just rang the bell, so I think we have discussed all aspects with all molecular markers. So I thank all my panelists for a well informed discussion, and I thank the organizers, Dr. Suman, Dr. Dhairishil Sawan, for giving me this opportunity to discuss such an important topic on Sunday morning. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.